How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Today I just want to jump straight forward to what we're really gonna do, which is actually coding, and that is to see how can we now look at the difference between the React and Vue when it comes to handling events. Remember that at the end of the day, React is just is a library for building user interface, and it's something that we're gonna explore that a little bit in today's video, is to see that, hey, do you have now this React wrapper around the DOM to actually expose some of the things that allow us to compose this user interface, right, in a tree-like data structure. Whereas now Vue says, hey, no, we are not on a UI. We are is a rendering systems that anytime you're going to pass of an object that will contain is the reactive data, as well as the method and the things that we want to watch in some computer property that we're going to talk in today's video as well. Once you pass me now this particular object that will represent is now this state, as well as the functionality that we can apply to this data, pretty much like an object-oriented programming, when you have your date and the methods, then you want to bundle all of them together. All right, we're gonna do that. So we're going to now keep track is when an state updates. So you're now going to automatically see those changes in the DOM. So this is something that is quite powerful, because we don't have to worry about managing state managing and that kind of thing, and all the wireless that happen behind the scenes, and all of these particular concepts that we need to learn, especially when you immerse yourself in Redux and understand what Redux is. And after all, that Redux is a monad, and what monads is, which is now a functional programming data structure that allows us is to group is state and a set of behaviors that allows us to interact with similar data structures in this functional programming, right? So pretty much like you have now objects and arrays and binary tree, and then you have now a way of how you can interact with each one of them. So the functional programming allows you is to do that, is to see how you can now interact with this. Again, I'm still exploring that particular idea, but the thing here is that at the end of the day, we want is to now understand all of these particular concepts, and that's when we need to go into the functional programming. Again, we're not going to explore that topics, not in today's video. But it's important to recognize that the reason of why we need to learn this functional programming is just as a way to understand the value that is provided to us, especially when we need to handle a large amount of data. And how can we make that in a way that is human readable, in a sequential, so we can process it in a sequential blocking, reasonable code, right? So let's get into this. So here we got is now our, let's gonna do this in CodePen, the CodePen. All right, in CodePen, let's going to now create is let's going to add now the functionality here to this particular list of rendering, right? Where here we're gonna say, hey, how can I create a new collection from this? Well, it doesn't matter. I just want to explore here, how can we now, okay, yeah, in a new one. All right, good. So it will render all of these elements, right? And what I want to do here is to now add the functionality from this, which is pretty straightforward here. okay, and try to actually mimicking this behavior. So how can we do that? You may wonder. Well, glad you asked. So here, first we want us to now is add on each one of those elements, we want to create now a bottom here. So it means that right below this, we want us to create now a bottom. So glad you asked. So how can we actually create? So what is the design of this first? So first we want us to now mimic this behavior, okay? So create is this, perhaps without an H1, and that is we are wrapping everything in an H1, and I don't want to, right? I just want to wrap this into a div, okay? And then you got all of this. In this list component, it'll of course gonna be wrapped here. And the design of this will be something like this. We want us to show the text, the button, okay? And they have the ability to actually bind that without JSX. Oh, that'll be quite interesting. Oh, that'll be quite interesting there. So let's get to create create elements in React here. This is when you're gonna pass now a children props, and this children props, it can be 0 or more child nodes. So we are assuming that we pass them as an array, right? There can be any React nodes, including React elements, string, number, portals, empty nodes. You might wonder why you want to pass an empty node if you are in the end of the, if you are in the leaf component, you want to pass that. An array of React nodes as well. So, so caveat, you must treat React elements as their props as immutable and never change their content of the creation. Okay. So first things first is like, hey, how can we now create using is this, right? So in this case, I would like to pass now some children component just to actually see if this will work. If I pass now a content here by saying, hey, this will be now an H1 and followed by a list of components, do you accept that? It does, but it's not part of this list component. Makes sense, because here you create now 2 nodes here. Question, can it be something like this? As a way to say, hey, this is H1, and then you follow by the list component. No. So if I say something like a React.create element, and I say, hey, this will be now an H1, okay, that it won't have any props, but it will have a content called is the avatar, characters, right? And that'll be all, right? So it now render that the avatar character as expected, exactly as you can see here. It render one component and then following by the another. So in our case, we don't want to actually pass any content here to our root element, and we can say is, hey, I want you to now say something like this. This is our list component, and this is our title. So title component. Well, here's when we're going to create this element here, and then we're going to pass that to that. So as you can see, here we're passing is the title component, okay, the title component and the list component. So we're saying, hey, this title component, okay, now the next children it'll be is the list component. So these two elements here are siblings. Exactly. And they are sibling indeed. Good. So far so good. So because this is our sibling elements, well, we want is now to add this button here, and the way we can add this button here, it can be dynamically here, all right, by saying, hey, in the piece of content here, I would like to now say, I would like to create now buttons here, right? So this means that is, hey, I would like to now create now is more buttons here. You say, hey, so not only so create these elements, create these sibling elements here by saying, hey, React dot create element here. That you say first is the name, all right. And the next element here will be is a button here. That is a button here with the properties without any property, and the content will be is now this particular content. Where it is? What in the F French toast is this one? I'm creating that dynamically, which is here. Okay, this will be the content. Okay, this will be the content here of this button. So it's gonna render that as expected, right? There is no ability to actually say, hey, can you add some padding, some margin here? So I don't want to put all these elements too close together. One way to do that is by saying, hey, append some space here, you know, for that, so we can now add some elements here, some space here. So okay, so yeah, so we can now create is, oh my god, yeah, French toast. Okay, with the content favorite like so, all right, and then we can say, hey, instead of doing this, let's going to now create is a button component here from the React here, and what we're gonna do is to let me define this right below here. Okay, you define this button here, and then right after that you say, hey, I would like you to now is append that to the button component. Okay, so now we can actually see what are the components that we are importing here. So it's not rendering. What about now? I don't think it's rendering because there must be some issue here, especially with, there you go. Okay, now you do it. All right. Okay. Is this one? Is this one? Exactly. All right. So this is now how we start to compose these components, right? So okay, this is just to compose the user interface, and all of this we are accessing to each one of these independent elements as it is, and so on and so forth, right? So far so good. Okay, but what I see is that now by the time we want to add some interactivity here, and this is when the things get quite interesting. So these props, the props argument must be either an object or null. If you pass null, it will be treated the same as an empty object. React will create elements with props matching the props you have passed. Note that the ref and key from your props object are special and will not be available as element props.ref. Again, the question is now, how can we now add interactivity to this? You know, because this is to showing elements is quite interesting, right? For showing elements is quite interesting. For showing element is quite interesting. So, if we want to actually trigger an event here, one way we can do that is to say, hey, this is quite interesting here. How do you now listen to events here with this model? Because at the end of the day, this is a component here, the title component, okay? This will now expose this create element, okay? It serves as an alternative for writing JSX. And this create element this create elements where it doesn't specify what it is, type props, type default, ref, and key. The way how do we do that with JSX is by defining it. Okay. Now let's make it straightforward. Yeah, let's make it straightforward. Okay, so yeah, so based on the following React code, okay, how can I add an event listener to my button component? Because at the end of the day, document.create is that, so you can now listen to that particular component, unless that component expose you that. Oh, okay, it's here that it allows you to do this. So props, the props you have passed access the ref and the key is a type, is a component with legacy, default type props. So this props, which is an object, okay, and this will be now the method that you can pass through. Okay, on click, I want you to now. Okay, yeah, the documentation here is not that great. The documentation here is not that great. Okay, okay, so here is when you're going to pass now a props call an event handler, okay, on click, and that is okay, it is own defined Jesus React create element API. It's a GitHub, so GitHub React create element here. But this is no, I wanna know is the one who comes from render and create element. Workshop pensando en React. Oh, okay. Okay, okay. Okay, but okay, wait a single moment here because okay. Create element type key on the file is handled incorrectly. And it's in 2016. And this is from the React Go base, declarative component base that won't write anywhere. Quick starter, add React to system project, create a new React app. No, but Jesus. Scripts. No, but this is automatic script exactly. Package. No, all of the packages they use. The compiler. But what if I want to take a look at the create element? You know, methods. This is test. This is test. But here, because it takes the type, the configuration. Okay. Okay, this is what I was definitely looking for. Okay, this is how you can create elements. Okay, this is how you can create elements, and the other is that exactly for creating React elements. Okay, and the other is for understanding the props or the configuration, exactly the configuration object. Okay, so this is getting into the weeds, and you say, hey, this is config, right? Yeah, if this is development, what config represents, my friend? Remaining properties are added to the new props. Okay. It makes sense. It makes sense. It seems that you are mapping that. You are mapping the prop names. Okay. Reserve name are extracted. You are mapping the prop names here. Okay. Remaining properties are added to a new props object. Exactly. You are now checking for that. So that's why now in this config object it exposes. It makes a lot of sense. So now here is where this expose is something that we don't have to worry about that because this is not something that you are going to frequently do that. Okay, you are not going to frequently do that. React done components. So because of that, okay, custom HTML elements, my elements, because of this, okay, that at the end of the day, we got is this. So because of this, all right, this is now property that are exposed here. This is our property that are exposed here and are exposed here. get component name from type. And this is just a leaf of property that they are actually is getting from them. So type the default props. Okay, so what it's doing is mapping. Oh, this is interesting. What it's doing is mapping the type that you pass in here, and now expose you this HTML attributes, and that include event listeners. Holy moly. But again, it's a wrapper of this event listener. So it means that by the time you want to actually listen to a particular event, you say on click, all right, which is this property. I want you to now is trigger is this one, you know. I want you to call now this particular function. Let me see if that actually is working as expected in the context of that. Handle button, click character. In this case, not at all. I just want to use an inline for the moment to see if we're actually getting that. So by the time we click here, all right, we're supposed to get is that particular event, right? So we close here. So by the time we close this, it says log skip. Sorry, this log cannot be shown. Might need to use a browser console instead. You son of a. Anyway, and we are actually getting that. But this is a synthetic event, or a synthetic attribute, that because it's a wrapper around all. Jesus. So React is just a wrapper of all of these HTML elements that you have, and expose certain common functionality that are compelling when it comes to write this user interface. So it means that, holy moly, bro, this is going too deep, bro. This is to actually understand now this as it is. So it means that by the time that we click here, all right, we want is to now add that particular name to okay, we want to add that particular name to the to our favorite list. Oh my god. Okay, so not only that, is because we also need to create another user component, or another component right below here, okay, that'll be is, hey, this is how we create our list components. Exactly, character list and list components. Okay, we can call this is a character list component. Okay, to provide a more meaningful name. That's right. A title component in character list component. As you can see this. And okay, so we got our user interface, specific user interface, and then we're generating is the data here to actually generate our character list component. Holy moly. All right, and the other is the favorite list that initially is empty. So what we're gonna do here is to, because this must be a length, that's right. So what we're going to do here is to say, hey, I want you to know this be a set, like so. I don't think that we need to use is set like so, new set in JavaScript. Let me see if I get that right. It's just a new set. Okay, we need to call that with the constructor function. Okay, We need to call them with the constructor function. Okay, function constructor here, new set. All right, and I'm doing this because I want, anytime that I add any elements here, I just want to be one. I just want to keep one of them, eliminate duplicate values here. All right, so far so good. And so by the time we click here, we want is to say, hey, I would like to now is call a function, all right, that'll be responsible for handling that. You say, hey, handle favorite list, okay, and this will be a function that you're going to receive is the event, all right, from that event handler, well, just going to go with the function definition here. In our case, we can use this. We can use this the arrow function because we're gonna make use of the arguments, and we want the value of this be contextual, be lexical. It means that the value of this is where it was written. So it means that I want to now have access to the favorite list, okay, and add this element that I'm receiving here, which is in this case, instead of actually handling the event, I'm going to receive is the name as it is, or the name, you know, I put it here, the name. So by the time I call this function, okay, I pass now the handle favorite list, but I want this to pass the I want to pass this because this is I wanted to pass this function here, which is I want to call this function exactly. I want to call this function. So I want to call this function in the bottom. I want to call this function exactly, but I want to call this function is on the bottom, not here, not in the list item. I want to call it into the bottom here. So here I say, hey, on click, I want to call that. Oh my God, here we go. This is when you define your data, all right, similar to this. Of course, this bottom must be defined first. So it means that we need to define this after that. All right, so it can now render as expected. So I want to now call that on the bottom, but the way how I'm gonna call it is by actually using an arrow function here to actually call that with the value that I'm receiving here as a props. Okay, where this value that I'm receiving here as a props is interesting. So bottom component now becomes is a function when I'm going to pass now the name here, and then I'm gonna call is this, all right, to actually pass down that the handle favorite when you're going to receive now the name. Okay, wait, what? We're going to receive now the name, and the bottom itself is going to receive some property here, which is the name here. So by the time that now I add that, so I define is the logic here to when I click on the button, I'm gonna add that to the favorite list, but also I need to actually is render that. You know what I mean? I need to actually is re-render that, which is render the favorite list component. So how can we do that? Pretty much the way how we did here with our yeah, pretty much what we did here with the character list here. All right, where we say, hey, I would like to define is now a collection, but in this case, given this favorite list, all right, given this set, I want you to now map, all right, is each one of the elements inside of the map, well, we will have is the name, and then when they change, I want you to now run this function, right? Or by the time we now call this, we're gonna update it, but this won't work because these things live outside of that, and we are modifying is this. We are now here calling the favorite list, okay, with now a new set of elements here, which is the React component, and this, yes, with this React dot create element here. The elements that we want to create now is a list, so we can say create element here, that'll be list, right, without any configuration object or property option, and I want to render is now the name that you got this, right? Something like that. Something like that. All right. Jesus. So because this is not supported, not on sets, well, we can say is initially will be an empty array. All right. And I want to render these elements here, right, as sibling components on the app, which is on this is character list component. We can say, hey, favorite list component. Here we're gonna create is now a new element, which is create element here as a unordered as an unordered list with the configuration object like empty, right? And this character list, but in this case this will be the favorite list, right? And this is what we're gonna render as sibling in the entry point. Right? It is supposed to be rendered here as a sibling. This is now favorite list. Okay. That's right. We can actually is now add some siblings here and say, hey, favorite list, right? Followed by the other sibling childs. It's supposed to render this. No, you're not there. Favorite list. I want to now for each one of these elements here. Oh, of course, because initially there is no elements. That's right. Favorite at is not a function. Exactly. Now we need to actually define this as push, because we thought that this will be is an element, and now it'll add this element here, right? No, it's not. It's not working. That. Warning: each child in a list should have a unique key. Okay. So now things are starting to be a little bit more complicated here. Okay. But as you can see, the complexity increase here. Jesus. Here the complexity increase here. Data component, list component, character list. No, it's can I show favorite characters based on an event listener? Exactly. How can I show favorite characters when the user click on the bottom component? Exactly. This is because now you need to handle that favorite characters. This is when you're gonna render this, and this is when the thing started to get quite a little bit interesting here, because here you are defining now a render compound. Look at this. So look at how this actually have to change. The way how do we define all of this? This has to change, all right, in order for us to, I'm not sure is this is will gonna work, you know. So look at how everything have to change here. Okay, look at how everything have to change here just to start to render these elements here. And again, it's not working. Oh, there you got it. Oh, crap. Okay, because this we have to define now a render function where all of the things happen, and this is when we can now keep track of this. Holy moly. Holy French toast, bro. Holy French toast, bro. Holy French toast. Holy French toast, how things starting to now complicate a little bit. Create a component to display favorites. You're gonna show them and then the favorite characters as it is. Oh my god. Crap. And this actually is working as expected, right? So on the handler here, if the favorite character exactly is included, all right. It's not included, actually now, because this is part of the event handler, then we render the app to show the update favorites. Holy shit. This is the way how now you can do that in React without JSX. And this is important because this is what it's doing behind the scenes. So anytime you now calling is a handle click, you need to actually define is the render, all right? But what happens is that you don't need to define that for yourself. Anytime that there is a click here, or anytime that there is an state update, now it will call that function behind the scenes. It will call the render function, which means that it's going to evaluate, which is exactly what it's doing here. is now it's going to evaluate all of this set of instruction, okay? And if any of this change, and if any of these elements are different, it's going to apply the necessary DOM updates to that. But this is what happened truly when you now click an event here on the event. Oh my God. this, oh shit. I don't know what they're smoking, bro, but this is something that they need to deal with that, right? So this is an example of the React 18 event handling. So No-JSX. So you can now have a better understanding of what is going on here. This is quite interesting, because now the way how you can do that is by implementing this, and we also can now is you know what, you can actually is you can actually explain this a little bit more, or you can actually be more descriptive rather than imperative with Vue, because at the end of the day it will keep track when that state change happened, and that's all, bro. Here you can add them, and you make sure that it's adding there properly as expected, right? And similar to this, it will add them based on the order you add them. So for example, you click on Katara, and then Suko, and then top, and then end. Similar, we're using a set, right? If you add that now, for example, the Katara, then Suko, and then Suko again, and then top, and end. That's the thing, right? Holy moly. But again, the encapsulation here of the event handling in React is that you're going to define as a function that is going to now re-render what it means, reevaluate all of these components inside of these components and subsequent component when in this case an event handler is triggering, or in our case when a state change that is also trigger a state mutations. Holy moly, bro. Oh my God. So once we get that, once we understand that, it is time for us to look at the watchers and computer property exclusive in the context of the in the context of Vue, right?
Kicking off right now is on watchers and computer properties. We talked a lot about reactive data, and we saw that it's cool that it tracks, but the next step to reactive data a lot of times comes to the point where it's a question of what happens when things depend on that data, right? So you want something to happen when the reactive data changes. This is actually fairly common. So granted, we're doing a lot of things automatically at this point, right? So for example,
okay. So watchers and computer properties, when data change, you want to do something. We'll get a directive, value composition, create Vue apps, Vue basics, React basic examples, directive. So we talk about directive. We also talk about is this error handling in Vue modeling. So Vue 3 example, in React 18, No-JSX example. Holy bro. It was like, what the French stuff? Holy bro. Okay, that's quite interesting. Oh my God. Okay. Vue 3 example, React 18, Node.js example, and this is something important to be able to understand what is the philosophy behind that and how is their particular approach. Again, once you understand that, you will realize that this is what view example exactly. This is now React No-JSX example, similar for this view 3 example. This is just to understand that you quickly realize, like, you don't hate that thing. You just don't want to put the you don't want to you don't want to get it. You don't want to understand that. That's what happened. That's different. You don't want to understand that. You don't want to understand that. You don't want to understand. React 18 Node.js example, Vue 3 Node.js example, and here what we're doing is, so this is very interesting here. This is a very interesting here. So, difference. Or yeah, difference or yeah, difference. View 3 expose an object. Okay, View 3 expose an object when you can declare what will be the state exactly when you can declare what will be the, what are the states you want to keep track, and you want to keep track, so Vue can update them into the DOM, whenever a JavaScript state change, right? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Whereas with React 18, you need to define a render function that by the time that exactly, whereas with React 18 you need to define a render function with all of the components needed to be rendered. Okay, with all the components needed to be rendered. Exactly. Whereas with React 18, you need to define a render function with all the components needed to be rendered. That's right. So by the time you trigger an event like click, you call that render function with the new data. Holy moly, bro. This whole distinction is the fundamental of why are you building this why are you building this user interface? You know, why are you building this user interface? That's all. Why are you building this user interface? Mhm. Track state change, for example. Okay. Holy moly. All right. That give us a lot of perspective here. Let's get into this. Let's get into this with the TLDR of this, right? Okay. Depends on it. So you want something to happen with reactive data change. This is actually pretty common. Exactly. For something, okay, for something to happen when the reactive data change, we got watchers and computer properties. Properties. Okay. Let's get into this.
Cool that it tracks, but the next step to reactive data a lot of times comes to the point where it's a question of what happens when things depend on that data, right? So you want something to happen when the reactive data changes. This is actually fairly common. So granted, we're doing a lot of things automatically at this point, right? So for example, when the data updates, view will automatically update the HTML. But what do we want to do more fine-grained things? So for example, like we want to say, we want to watch the count up here, and if it's even, we want to go ahead and then say, update the title up here to something else, right? So you can imagine that if we had this to be counter title, for example, and counter title would just put it here. So counter title is going to be this standard, for example. So you refresh, great, counter standard here. And we want to say, we want to watch for if the count goes past 20, then we want to add like long to the text. And so your first instinct
we can define as a computer property here.
To be able to watch the thing, right? And so to watch something in Vue is actually fairly simple. There actually is a watch option, as you would expect. So we have data, we have methods. Here's our opportunity to watch something. And when you want to watch something, you basically say, what is it exactly that we're watching? Well, in this case, we're watching the count. And so,
wait a single moment. Because everything is around in the concept of reactivity. Okay, because everything revolves around the concept of reactivity. Yeah, because everything revolves around the concept of reactivity and observables.
When you actually define the count, though, what you want to do is you want to say, you need the value that is basically going to return to you by default, because otherwise you don't have something to refer to inside of that value. Because it's going to basically say, what's your new value, what's your old value. And so by default, you get the new value as the first one.
So this is the property that I want to keep track.
Now, here we have a simple watch, watching count, and then when it changes, we should automatically see it log. And so, watch count, refresh. Refreshing would be helpful. There we go. Okay, so we can see here, 1826, we're getting some logs as well here.
So anytime this state change, exactly. What is doing behind this thing is using proxy.
Okay, well, logically speaking, what I would do is I would say, well, if new value is greater than 20, then this dot counter title plus equals very long. Okay. Now, refresh, 1, 2, you can see, boom, it's updated. And so from a mental model perspective, you're like, yeah, that makes sense, cool. And so this is actually a common paradigm in a lot of frameworks when it comes to watching reactive dependencies, is what it's called. But Vue has a better way for us to do this, especially when it comes to modifying existing data. Because if you think about what we're doing here, what we're doing is we're saying, based on a reactive data property, run a specific computation. And then, but if we think about that from a performance perspective, we really only wanted to do that when all the like the right dependencies are triggered. And so one of the problems that comes with doing something as like explicitly watching values is sometimes, especially when apps get really large, the watch can end up getting triggered like a lot, like unnecessarily. And so when you
because after all, what you're doing is just running as a computation based on this dependency when they change.
hear things about people accidentally triggering re-renders, that's what they're talking about. Is because at that point you're manually watching the dependencies, and if you don't know what you're doing or not caching it correctly, all of a sudden you might be triggering re-rendering of thousands of nodes and whatnot. So Vue, in its Vue fashion, came up with an API that would help to abstract that away.
Exactly. It comes up with these helpful abstractions to help you with that performance optimization that you need to do. It's like, hey, I want you to run this computation, but not always. That's when they use perhaps behind the scenes is some memoization technique, something like that. So by the only when this, and it's because it's re-rendered.
The way it does that is through the idea of computed properties. And so the way computed properties work is basically another option on your app. So I'm going to add it below data because, and you'll see shortly why. So computed properties is, think of it as basically performance optimized calculations on reactive data that you have. So in the instance.
Wait, what?
So computed properties is, think of it as basically performance optimized calculations on reactive data that.
Performance optimized calculator based.
So in the instance of, for example, the counter title, right? Rather than it be like, okay, well, I'm going to have a watch on this count.
So rather than instead of actually watching the particular state on the data, we want us to define now as a computation that is going to run whenever that dependency changes. And not only that, behind the scene is handling is things like catching. It's like, hey, do that in the most performant way. Anytime we need to actually is, if we already pre-compute this property, or if we already use this property behind the scenes, please, let's go to access that quickly.
Then add the thing. Instead, you could be, I'll say, display title, for example. And so this will be a function that Vue will basically.
The Vue will say, hey, I'm gonna trigger this computation whenever this particular state that I want to keep track on, whenever state, whatever reactive value. Okay, I'm gonna run this computation whenever reactive value is being defined with some logic. Okay, whenever reactive logic, whenever reactive value with some logic is defined here.
Count greater than 20, return counter standard. Otherwise, return. Oh wait, in this case it was counter very long. Otherwise, return counter standard. Just like that.
Right. Exactly.
So we switch this over now to.
In this case, we're gonna call that to say, hey, please no Vue, please, re-render this component or interpolate this HTML.
You see nothing changes, and then it's swapped, and then it's good. And basically, even though you might think programmatically this looks very similar to what we just did, this is extremely powerful because what you've just done is now given Vue the job of figuring out when its dependencies have changed. And so to show you what I mean by that, we could even combine computed properties together. So for example, let's say that we actually wanted to impact the increment amount based on the length of the title. Let's just do that. So we could then say.
Do we want to increment based on the length of the title?
Let's see. Let's say call it optimize increment amount. And for whatever reason, we have some algorithm that's dependent on the counter title. What we could do is that we can return this dot counter title, or sorry, this dot display title dot length times, and then let's say this dot increment amount. So now we have two dependencies. We're depending on this display title here. We're dependent on increment amount here. But then once we update here to optimize increment amount, we can see now.
Okay, so here we're saying let's gonna call this optimize increment amount. You haven't used that because you say, hey, if this dot length, this display title dot length times this increment amount. So you're gonna show is the multiplication, the scaling factor, the moving, the scale of this. That's interesting, the power of the arithmetic here, because now multiplication is moving things. If you think that in the Cartesian plan, it's actually moving things from one place to another, right?
That things are starting to change actually pretty drastically, right? You're seeing that I realized you're not actually seeing the optimized.
But you're not using is that?
Where's my let's say optimized amount.
Exactly.
Good. So you see here it's 224 right here. And so it's changing because why? Because we've modified the title. If we modify this times 10, you see that now it's updating correctly by the increment amount, but the optimized amount is now dependent on two different things. And so what you get with computer properties is basically really efficient tool chaining on reactive dependencies. And this is a concept we're starting to see popularized. I think Svelte has something very similar as well now, in that if you think about an enterprise level app, there's going to be so much that's changing. And when you have manual definitions of what you're watching, oftentimes you'll find that it's actually fairly brittle, because one small change will break that entire dependency chain. Whereas here, you can have your source of truth being this data store, and then you can have all your computations run off of that thing, right? And it knows when to trigger, it knows what to do, it knows how to cache it, so that in the HTML it doesn't randomly trigger, like all that stuff that like our goal is to build cool things and to abstract business logic, deliver value to customers. As much as it's fun to learn about performance optimizations, that's not something we want to be debugging constantly. And so computer properties are incredibly
most of the time, if you are eloquent like that, it's like, yeah.
In fact, like if I were to say my single most like favorite feature of Vue, it's the computer property.
And it makes sense why this is so powerful, because it's now used to develop. It allows to develop an efficient build tool, for reactive
right? And it knows when to so
property.
And when you see popularized, I think Svelte has something very similar as well now, in that if you think about an enterprise level app, there's going to be so much that's changing. And when you have manual definitions of what you're watching, oftentimes you'll find that it's actually fairly brittle, because one small change will break that entire dependency chain. Whereas here, you can have your source of truth being this data store, and then you can have all your computations run off of that thing.
You can have your list of states here, and all of your computations run behind.
Right? And it knows when to trigger, it knows what to do, it knows how to cache it, so that in the HTML it doesn't randomly trigger, like all that stuff that like our goal is to build cool things and to abstract business logic, deliver value to customers. As much as it's fun to learn about performance optimizations, that's not something we want to be debugging constantly. And so computer properties are incredibly powerful for this. In fact, like if I were to say my single most like favorite feature of Vue, it's the computer property.
But it's mostly because we wanted to run some computation based on the state change.
Again, really easy.
There you got it.
And it's particularly powerful if you do any data visualization. You can imagine, right? You're doing all these SVG calculations based on a set group of data. You don't want to have to write the dependency chain that would update the SVG at this particular point, and then it swaps this way, or how it animates. Like all that can be managed basically with computer properties. And so some of the most elegant stores I've seen have like one source of truth inside of data, and then they compute everything else out. And it works really, really well. Computer properties. And so some of the most elegant stores I've seen have like one source of truth inside of data, and then they compute everything else out. And it works really, really well because Vue can optimize all those things.
And the way now how you can use this computer dependency, because after all this is like something quite different in the context of React, is that in React you have now you define is your states, and that's when you need to actually be clear about what is the state that you want to define inside of this. Okay, please avoid duplications, redundancy. Avoid duplications, redundancy, deeply nested objects, and state that depends on props. All right, your state must make sense in that React component context. Okay. So if you want to now compose more, you have these things called a context where you can put all of these particular states at certain point in your render tree that allow you to now is share that state across all of these different subset of render nodes. So there is a caveat with that, of course, because if, for example, that particular state change, given if that particularly change too often, not only so if that particular state in this context change too often, not only is going to change, is not only is going to trigger that context, but also is the not only going to trigger the context, not only going to trigger the context because the value will change from the provider, but also all of the nested children components below that, right? And this is not only triggers this, not only re-render the context, which is the provider, but also you are now re-render all of these other components that are under the umbrella of this context. That's not a good thing, especially if you are triggering that context too often. So this is not the React way, right? This is the React way.
A bit about computed properties and watchers. We're going to have you go ahead and play around with them. So,
okay.
For your exercise, you'll have put a bunch of characters inside of your show. So you probably have certain attributes that you can put basically on those characters, right? Whether it's their age, height, whatever you want. But then based on those, like add those attributes to your characters, and then use a computed property to start generating some sort of statistics. So for example, mine is Avatar Last Airbender. I could be like, oh, okay, 2 of them are waterbenders, 3 of them.
Exactly. Any computation from this state that you want to generate from that.
Might be. So just have a play around with that. It's one of those things where we'll be reusing a lot as we go forward. And so don't worry, you'll get plenty of opportunities to play. Which is not a great sort of technique in this particular case, is because you're dealing with the reactive data. In other words, you're basically doing a computation that you're manually tracking. This is not to say that watch as a technique is invalid, however. What that really means is that when it comes to computing data, combining those things like we see up here with optimized increment amount, where you have multiple dependencies, computed will do a lot of work for you right out of the gate. And so that's when you want to do that. Anytime you're modifying something, returning it, and you want to be like, oh, I want to display something slightly different. And so actually the question earlier regarding the strings and combining them, that would be an example where the character list, for example, could be like, let's say, comma separated. This is a bad name. But you could do something like this, that character list, that split. Like you could do your calculation in here and then just return that in the rendering.
And just return that in the rendering.
Good. So I will show that later when we do it. But the main point I want to make though is that watch is really good for when you want to trigger a side effect on your code base. So in other words, you can imagine if you might want to have a specific API call when your reactive data has hit a certain state. That would be a great example.
Interesting.
That later.
So watch is when you want to trigger a side effect.
The main point I want to make though.
And common side effects is that network calls, browser APIs, waiting for an image to load, waiting for the DOM to response, or waiting for a JavaScript event, so handling JavaScript events as well. This is okay. So watchers, this is a very interesting. So watch is now the similar to the use effect in terms of they need to actually handle side effects, and this is the place where you handle this. Oh, right.
You want to trigger a side effect on your code base. So in other words, you can imagine if you might want to have a specific API call when your reactive data has hit a certain state. That would be a great example of when computed wouldn't make any sense at all, because computed is about managing data, managing triggering actions, that kind of stuff. Watch is perfect for that kind of stuff. So just know that's the on your code base. So in other words, you can imagine if you might want to have a specific API call when your reactive data has hit a certain state. That would be a great example of when computed wouldn't make any sense at all, because computed is about managing data.
Managing data.
Triggering actions, that kind of stuff. Watch is perfect for that kind of stuff. So just know that's the main paradigm difference between the two. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. index to do this.
That's and this is something interesting. And this is something interesting. Exactly. Watchers are like use effect. Watchers in view are like use effect in React when you need to trigger or when you need to handle side effects. API as a network calls, network calls, network calls, browser APIs, DOM manipulation, network call, browser APIs, DOM manipulations.
Okay, so here, okay, got my.
In real world project.
Is it something that you define this as well? Exactly. Is this one. Network calls, DOM manipulations. You know, network call or AJAX requests. They call this AJAX requests. It's gonna call this to be more precise, right? So DOM manipulation, AJAX requests, global variables, event listeners, local storage, and animation. Anything that we need to wait for that, it sits here. Okay. Interesting. It's important to understand this difference here. A computed property is when you need to perform a computation, okay, in computer properties. Okay, exactly. There is no equivalent for that because again, Vue is solving a different problems. Computer property. Exactly. Computed. Exactly. Computer property. Right. Computer property is all about handling computations when your reactive data change. Computer property is all about handling computation when you reactive data change in a performant way. So catching. Question is what are you catching, bro? Okay. So what are you catching, bro? So exactly in Vue, in Vue 3, computer property is all about handling computation when your reactive data change in a performant way. Question. What is what exactly question? What is or what optimization computed property thus behind the scenes, right? And also I want to ask that to Claw for that. And also to check that, of course, with the docs. Dependency tracking, lazy evaluation, efficient memory use. The caching mechanism also helps in optimized memory usage by storing computer value and refreshing them only when necessary. You minimize the memory footprint associated with intermediary results during rendering. This is particularly beneficial for applications dealing with large data set or complex calculation. Synchronous evaluation. So transparent handling of complex logic. Okay. Lazy evaluation, caching. Computer property only reevaluate when the reactive dependencies change. The result is cached and returned directly on subsequent access until dependency state to avoid unnecessary recalculation on each component we render. Then you got dependency tracking. You automatically track reactive dependency used inside the computer getter. Okay. Use a dependency tracking system based on EX proxy. Is using a dependency tracking system using EX6 proxy, because proxy allow you to track this. Only updates when track dependency change. Not on every reactive data change. Only update when track dependency change. Not on every reactive data change. Memory management. Computer caches are automatically garbage collected when the computer property is no longer in use. Which means that when you remove this component, you get out of this, is making that memory candidate for the garbage collector. Prevent memory leaks from long-living cache values. Computer property chaining. Efficient dependency chains update. Chains propagate optimally through the change. Each computer in the chains only update when necessary. Side effect handling. Computer property should be pure, no side effects. You enforce this by making computer setters trigger a warning in development mode. This prevents unexpected behavior and maintain predictable data flow. So the point of this is that it's optimizing is dependency tracking. Is optimizing is this dependency tracking by using EXs and making this tracking and making this store and making this cached values computer cache or this and making this computation and making this caching computation, which is memorization, eligible for the garbage collector. Oh crap. God damn it. All right. Okay. That's interesting. That's very, 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 very interesting. Very, very interesting. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.